The dining room at my in-laws' house had been decorated within an inch of its life. Patricia had outdone herself, this Christmas fresh pine garlands wrapped around every banister, white candles in silver holders down the center of the long mahogany table, and a catered spread that must have cost more than my first car. 22 people filled the chairs, and I was seated near the end, next to my husband's aunt who was hard of hearing and preferred to talk at people rather than with them. I didn't mind the seat. I'd learned to stop minding things like that. Claire. My sister-in-law's voice cut through the low murmur of conversation like a letter opener through an envelope. Vanessa had a gift for that, making her voice carry exactly as far as she wanted it to. I keep meaning to ask you, what is it you actually do all day? The table didn't go completely silent the way it might in a movie, but there was a perceptible ripple. Conversations slowed. Eyes drifted my direction. Vanessa sat 3 seats up from me, next to her husband Brett, who was already on his 3rd glass of wine. She was 36, a senior partner at Caldwell & Moore, one of the top corporate law firms in Atlanta, and she wore that fact the way other women wore expensive perfume. Constantly, enthusiastically. In enclosed spaces. I work from home, I said, reaching for the breadbasket. Tech consulting, mostly. Vanessa tilted her head. The gesture managed to convey sympathy, curiosity, and mild pity all at once. It was actually impressive. Tech consulting, she repeated. That sounds flexible. The pause before flexible did a lot of work. My husband Daniel was seated across from me, deep in conversation with his father about the Falcons season. He hadn't heard the exchange. Or if he had, he'd decided the Falcons were more urgent. 8 years of marriage had taught me which battles Daniel chose to notice. It is flexible, I said pleasantly. I set my own hours. That must be nice. Vanessa smoothed her napkin across her lap. I've been billing 90-hour weeks since September. The Hartwell acquisition alone has been, well, you wouldn't know the case, but it's been enormous. Nationwide implications. She glanced around the table to make sure the right people were listening. They were. Richard. You'd actually find the regulatory angle fascinating. My father-in-law, Richard Harrison, turned toward her with the focused attention he reserved for people he considered serious. He was 67, had built Harrison Industrial Supply into a regional powerhouse over 30 years, and he had never once asked me a single question about my work. Not in 4 years of marriage to his son. Tell me, Richard said. Vanessa launched into it. I buttered my roll. The dinner continued. The catered roast was excellent. Patricia kept refreshing the candles that didn't need refreshing. Vanessa's case study became a 15-minute monologue that wandered through billing structures and precedent-setting rulings and a federal judge she apparently played tennis with. I listened with the quiet attention I developed over 2 decades of sitting in rooms where people thought they were the most important person present. At some point, Vanessa's 12-year-old, Madison, tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered something. Vanessa waved her off without breaking her sentence. My niece Lily, Daniel's brother's daughter, caught my eye from down the table and made a small face. I pressed my lips together to keep from smiling. Then my nephew, Cooper, 16, and recently granted the dangerous combination of social media access and an opinion, looked up from his phone and said, Aunt Claire, is it true you used to work at a real company? Before you stopped? The table recalibrated again. I didn't stop working, I said. Oh. Cooper shrugged with the extraordinary indifference only teenagers could produce. Dad said you used to do something in tech, but then you kind of stepped back when you married Uncle Daniel. I looked at my brother-in-law Kevin, who had the grace to find his plate extremely interesting. Kevin. Daniel had caught that one. That's not Claire works, she's always worked. I'm just saying what you told me, Kevin said, not unkindly. He genuinely believed it. Vanessa had been watching this exchange with the careful neutrality of someone collecting information. Daniel mentioned you had some kind of startup, years ago, she said to me. What happened to it? Did it not pan out? It panned out, I said. She nodded with the specific expression that meant she didn't believe me but was too polished to say so outright. These things are so unpredictable. Brett had a friend who put everything into an app company, completely convinced it was going to take off. 3 years, no traction. Had to go back to a real salaried position in the end. She smiled at me across the candles. Sometimes the safe path is the smart path. Daniel said, Vanessa, Claire's company actually did. What was it called? Vanessa asked, turning to me fully now. The way she pivoted, the way she set down her wine glass with that particular deliberateness. I understood that she had been building to this question for most of the dinner. Lumen, I said. Lumen. She tapped one finger on the table, performing the act of searching her memory. I don't think I know it. You might know our products, I said. We license infrastructure to about 40% of the mid-market fintech sector. A small silence. 40%. Brett, who worked in commercial banking, had looked up from his wine. Mid-market fintech. Give or take a few points this quarter. Vanessa smiled the way people smile when they're recalculating. That sounds like you had some success with it. Did you sell? A lot of founders cash out early, which I mean, that's smart. Take the win. I didn't sell. Oh. The smile again. So you're still actively running it? Yes. From home. Mostly. I travel when I need to. Vanessa looked at Daniel. Daniel was looking at me with an expression I recognized, the particular mix of pride and mild alarm that appeared on his face whenever my work came up around his family. He loved me. He also loved keeping the peace, and those two things had been in quiet conflict for most of our marriage. Forgive me, Vanessa said, with the tone of someone who wasn't asking for forgiveness. But 40% of mid-market fintech would be a significant operation. We're talking real infrastructure, real headcount. You're telling me you run that from your home office in Decatur? I have offices, I said. Atlanta, Austin, and London. The Decatur house is just where I sleep. The table had genuinely stopped now. Even Patricia had paused in her candle adjustments. Richard Harrison set down his fork. In 20 years of dinners with that man, I had never seen him set down his fork mid-meal. Claire, he said slowly, what exactly is Lumen's revenue? I took a sip of water. Last fiscal year? About 480 million. The number sat in the center of the table like an unexpected guest. Gross? Kevin said. Net. Cooper had stopped being indifferent to anything. His mouth was partially open. Vanessa laughed, a quick, sharp sound. I'm sorry, that's Claire, that's a $500 million company. Closer to 530, with this year's projections, I said. We had a strong Q3. That's not possible. Vanessa said it without meaning to, I think. The polish slipped for just a moment. A company that size Caldwell and Moore would know it. I would know it. You might know our parent entity, I said. We operate under Lumen Holdings. The consumer-facing products use sub-brands. I paused. Actually, you do know one of them. Your firm uses Clarify for internal document management. We built that. Vanessa blinked. Clarify is a Lumen product? We acquired them in 2019 and rebuilt the platform from the ground up. Last I checked, Caldwell and Moore has about 340 active licenses. The silence was different now. Thicker. Daniel was very still across from me. Not upset, just absorbing, the way he always did when the gap between what his family assumed about me and what was actually true became impossible to paper over. This was what I'd asked him not to do, years ago, when we were still dating. Don't announce it. Don't lead with it. Let people show me who they are first. He'd agreed. Though I knew it cost him something, he was proud of me in the uncomplicated, generous way that was one of the reasons I'd married him. Staying quiet had never come naturally to him when it came to me. But he'd done it. And so we'd had 4 years of his family seeing exactly who they were. Daniel. Richard's voice was careful now, measured. The voice he used in board meetings. Did you know about this? Yes, sir, Daniel said. For how long? Since before we got married. Richard turned back to me. Something was working behind his eyes, a reassessment happening in real time, like tumblers in a lock. Lumen Holdings. He said it quietly, to himself. Your last name before you married Daniel. Whitfield, I said. I watched him get there. I'd been watching people get there for 15 years and it never quite lost its particular texture. Claire Whitfield. He said it slowly. You're C.W. You're the C.W. From the Southeastern Tech Forum, the keynote in 2019. And 2021, I said. I missed 2020 for obvious reasons. I was at that forum. His voice had gone quiet. I sat in the audience. He stopped. I didn't know C.W. was a woman. You never used your full name in the materials. People make assumptions, I said. I let them. Mom was at that forum, Daniel said, almost to himself. Patricia's hand had stopped moving entirely. She was looking at me across the length of the table with an expression I had never seen on her face in 4 years. It took me a moment to identify it because it was so unfamiliar in her direction. It was deference. Claire. Vanessa had recovered her composure, though there was a new quality to her voice, something careful and controlled where there had been easy authority before. I want to be clear, I wasn't trying to be dismissive. I genuinely didn't know. I know, I said, if I'd known the scale of what you'd built. You still would have sat me at the end of the table, I said, not unkindly. That's not a criticism. It's just true. We judge people by what we can see, and I don't show much. I looked at her directly. You're very good at your work, Vanessa. The Hartwell analysis you mentioned, I actually read the summary your firm published. The regulatory framework you applied was smart. She stared at me. We've been looking for outside counsel for an acquisition in the compliance space, I continued. I've had 2 firms on a shortlist. Caldwell and Moore is one of them. I held off because I wasn't sure about the cultural fit. The word cultural fit landed with precision. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. And now? I'm recalibrating, I said. Brett had gone very still beside her. He was a practical man and I watched him do the arithmetic. Cooper, to his credit, had put his phone away entirely. Aunt Claire, he said, when did you start it? Lumen? I incorporated when I was 23. It was just me and 2 other people for the first 3 years. We worked out of a rented storage unit in Buckhead because real office space was too expensive and none of us were willing to admit we might fail. A storage unit, Patricia said faintly. We put a space heater in it in winter. It was, honestly, one of the best periods of my life. We had nothing, and we were building everything. I smiled at the memory. The first major contract we landed, all 3 of us sat on the floor of that storage unit and cried. Not from happiness, exactly. More from relief that it was real, that it was actually happening. Lily, who was 14 and had been watching everything with enormous eyes, said, "Were you scared?" "Constantly," I said. "Being scared means the thing matters enough to be worth your full attention. I've been scared for 15 years. I expect to be scared for the next 15. Daniel was looking at me from across the table with the expression he got sometimes late at night when he thought I was asleep, the one that was just quiet and full and completely unguarded. I had married him specifically because of that expression. Because he was the only person whose surprise about me was always followed by something that looked like wonder rather than recalculation. "Why didn't you say something?" Patricia asked. She wasn't accusatory, she seemed genuinely confused. The way people are when they realize they've been missing a piece of something obvious for a long time. "I did," I said. "I told you I worked in tech. I told you I had a company. I told you I traveled for work. I mentioned the London office when you asked why we couldn't always make it for Sunday dinners. I kept my voice gentle because she hadn't been cruel, she'd been incurious, which wasn't quite the same thing. You heard works from home and filled in the rest yourself." Patricia's chin lowered slightly. "That's fair," she said quietly. "That's fair, Claire." "Richard." I turned to my father-in-law. "You've been trying to renegotiate your supply chain contracts for 18 months. Daniel mentioned it last spring. The margins on your Atlanta distribution have been compressing." Richard looked startled. "How did you?" "He talks to me," I said simply. "I know about your business because I listened. And I've known for about a year that there's a vendor consolidation strategy that would recover most of those margins. But I wasn't going to offer it to someone who'd never asked my opinion on anything more significant than which wine I preferred." Richard Harrison, who had built a company over 30 years and had never once been stopped mid-sentence by a woman at his own dinner table, opened his mouth and then closed it. "I'd like to offer it now, if you're interested," I said. "Not as a favor. As a business conversation between equals. We can set up a proper meeting in January." Yes," he said. "I would very much like that." I nodded and reached for my water glass. Vanessa had been quiet for several minutes, which was unusual enough that Brett had glanced at her twice to confirm she was still conscious. When she spoke, her voice was different, stripped of the performing quality, just clean and direct. The acquisition you mentioned, she said. The compliance space. I'd like to be considered seriously. I know you would, I said. Send me the firm's relevant case history. Not through your assistant directly, from you. And include the Hartwell analysis, the full internal version, not the published summary. How do you know there's an internal version? There's always an internal version. Something shifted in her expression. I had seen it before the moment when someone stopped categorizing you and started actually looking. It was worth waiting for every time. Cooper raised his hand like he was in school. Can I ask, do you like it? Actually like it, not just I'm successful so I should say I love it like. I laughed an actual laugh, not the polite kind. Yes. I genuinely, honestly like it. There are days I don't, same as any job. But building something from nothing, watching people develop, solving a problem that looked impossible, there's nothing quite like it. I looked at my nephew. What's the thing you can't stop thinking about? He blinked. What? The thing that keeps showing up in your head whether you want it to or not. That's usually pointing at something. Cooper chewed on his cheek for a moment, visibly trying to decide whether to be cool or honest. He chose honest. Game design, he said. Like, the architecture of how games work, not just playing them. That's engineering with narrative, I said. Which is its own discipline and a genuinely useful one. Don't let anyone tell you it isn't serious. Kevin, his father, looked at me for a long moment. We didn't know, he said. Not an excuse, more like accounting for himself. I told Cooper you'd stepped back from your career. And I believed that when I said it. That wasn't I should have asked you directly. You should have, I agreed. But we can start from here. Daniel exhaled across from me. I could see something loosening in his shoulders, a tension he'd carried for years, the particular weight of watching people underestimate someone you love and not being able to fix it for them. He'd wanted to fix it so many times. I'd always asked him to let me do it myself. I have a question, Patricia said, with the careful tone of someone choosing words precisely. And you can absolutely tell me it isn't my business. Go ahead. Did you ever consider, were you ever angry? With us? The dinners, the way we talked about, well, the way we talked around you. Did it hurt? I was quiet for a moment, giving the question the honesty it deserved. Sometimes, I said. Not because I needed your approval, but because I loved Daniel, and you're his family, and wanting to be seen by the people who matter to someone you love, that's just human. It would have been nice to be asked. I paused, but I also know that I made choices that kept the information from you, and I can't have it both ways. What I can say is that I'm not carrying anything. I don't do resentment well, it takes up too much space. Patricia nodded slowly. Her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the candlelight. Vanessa's daughter Madison had been listening for the past 10 minutes with the focused, still attention of a child who knows something important is happening and doesn't want to miss it. Are you famous? She asked me. Not particularly, I said. In certain rooms, people know my name. In most rooms, I'm just a woman who works in tech. But you're really rich. Madison, Vanessa said. It's a fair question, I said. Yes. Comfortable, let's say. Why do you drive that car? Madison pressed. Uncle Daniel's car is nicer than yours. I glanced at Daniel, who was biting the inside of his cheek. Because I like that car, I said. I bought it in 2009 when Lumen landed its second major contract, and it has 180,000 miles on it. And it starts every morning and gets me where I need to go. I don't need a car to tell people who I am. Madison considered this with the gravity of a 12-year-old encountering a worldview that contradicted her assumptions. My mom says your car looks like it belongs in a Cracker Barrel parking lot, she said. The table went briefly, absolutely silent. Vanessa closed her eyes. I laughed. Genuinely, completely, a laugh that surprised even me. Madison, I said, never lose that. The world needs more people who say the exact true thing. By the time Patricia brought out the dessert, something had reconfigured in the room. Not repaired. Some of the 4 years of Sunday dinners and quiet condescension couldn't be undone in a single conversation, and I wasn't asking for that. But something had been named and put in its proper place, and the air was different for it. Richard pulled me aside in the hallway while Patricia served the pecan pie. He was a large man who moved deliberately, and he stood in front of me with the particular discomfort of someone who had decided to say a thing they weren't practiced at saying. I owe you an apology, he said. You don't have to. I do. He shook his head once, the way he probably shook off interruptions in board meetings. I made assumptions about you based on what I could see, which is what I tell any junior employee never to do. I was lazy. He paused. I was also, frankly, not paying enough attention to my son's wife, which is its own failure. Richard, I said. You're saying this now. That counts. I'd like that January meeting, he said. Not as a favor from my daughter-in-law. As a business meeting. That's exactly how I want it, I said. We went back in for pie. Daniel found me in the kitchen 20 minutes later, both of us carrying empty serving dishes the catering staff had missed. He set his down on the counter and leaned against the edge, watching me with that expression again. You planned that, he said. It wasn't an accusation. I planned to tell the truth if someone asked me a direct question, I said. Vanessa asked. He shook his head slightly, but he was smiling. You could have done this at literally any point in 4 years. I could have, I said. Why tonight? I thought about it. Cooper, I said, the way he said it. Aunt Claire used to do something, before she stopped. That wasn't mean, it was just that's the story they had about me, and he's 16 and he's going to grow up carrying that story as a fact. I shrugged. I didn't want that for him. He's smart and he's going to need to understand that the architecture of things isn't always visible from the outside. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. I should have pushed harder, he said. With my family. I let it go too many times. You let me handle it my way, I said. That's not the same thing. It felt like the same thing, some nights. I know, I said. I know it did. And I'm telling you it wasn't. I picked up my serving dish. Also, for the record, your car is not nicer than mine. He laughed, and it was the easy, full laugh that I had fallen in love with, the one that lived in the middle of his chest, and the kitchen felt warm and ordinary and good. We went back to the table. The rest of the evening was quieter, softer at the edges. Vanessa asked me 3 specific, intelligent questions about the compliance acquisition, and I answered 2 of them and deflected the third because the answer was still under NDA. She took the deflection without pushing, and I marked it in the column of things I'd learned about her tonight. Kevin asked Cooper to put his phone down, and Cooper, still processing, actually did. Patricia sat next to me when people moved around after dessert and asked, carefully, about the London office, whether I liked the city, whether I went often, whether the team there was good. Small questions, genuinely asked. I answered all of them. Richard spent 45 minutes talking to Daniel, which they did most Christmases. But this time when Daniel caught my eye across the room, his expression was different, unburdened. I think, in a way I hadn't fully registered he'd been burdened before. We'd been carrying this together longer than I realized. When Daniel and I finally drove home, the highway was quiet and dark and the city lights pushed orange against the low clouds. Caldwell and Moore, Daniel said. You're really considering them. They're genuinely good, I said. The Hartwell work was excellent. If Vanessa can adjust the way she enters a room by about 30%, she'll be formidable. And my dad's supply chain? I've had the vendor analysis done for 8 months, I said. I was waiting until he was ready to have the conversation. Daniel was quiet for a moment. You were waiting for all of it, weren't you? Not just tonight, all of it. You were patient. I'm very patient, I said. He reached over and took my hand on the center console, the way he'd done since our 3rd date, and he didn't say anything else for a long while. The highway unreeled in the headlights. Cracker Barrel parking lot, he said eventually, with reverence. Madison is going to be either a trial attorney or a journalist, I said. The world should probably prepare. He squeezed my hand and laughed, and I drove us home through the dark in my car with 180,000 miles on it, and the heater worked perfectly, and I didn't need anything more than what I had.